Embers of Rivalry. The days that followed blurred into rhythm. Dawn gongs, cold water on the face, the shuffle to the platform etched with spirals. Breathing exercises until lungs ached and ribs reminded him of the climb that had brought him here. Endless stances until knees quivered and calves burned. Instructor Cai's voice did not rise or fall so much as cut. He corrected with a glance, a tap of the staff, a single word that removed excuses the way a knife removes bark. Beneath the grind something began to change. At first it was a lighter step leaving the platform after meditation. Then a steadier breath even when fatigue gnawed. Then a clarity that made the world look arranged rather than scattered, as if the courtyards had been swept while he was not looking. By the fourth morning the warmth he had felt once as a flicker did not vanish when the gong faded. It pulsed, faint but steady, an ember glowing in the basin of his dantian. When he settled cross-legged on the carved stone and allowed his breath to deepen, that ember answered him. It did not blaze and it did not stray. It simply stayed. Hope stirred. Quiet, wary, but real. He guarded it the way a cook guards the first fire of the day, hands cupped near, not daring to blow too hard for fear of smothering it. Not all moved with him. Across the circle Zhao Ren sat ramrod straight, jaw clenched so hard the muscles stood like cords. The rise and fall of Zhao's chest was a stutter rather than a tide. Where others softened into the exercise, Zhao fought it as if the breath itself were an enemy. Each dismissal saw him on his feet before the last word left Cai's mouth. He walked quickly, shoulders squared, followers falling in behind like reeds bending to current. Pride wrapped him like a cloak that did not keep out the cold. Disciples notice what the elders do not bother to say aloud. Whispers slid through the ranks like smoke along rafters. Have you heard? The elders pick struggles with the first gate. They say Zhao Ren has trained longer than most outers. If even he cannot catch the current, what hope for us? No, look at Liang Sit. There is a steadiness in him now. Perhaps the spiral is not only a brand. Words feed on attention. The more people tried not to stare at Zhao Ren, the more eyes flicked toward him at the end of each session. He felt every glance and met some of them with a glare that dared anyone to speak again. That glare found Liang often. It hardened by day. On the fifth evening the sky was a wine stain. The sun sank behind the black line of the ridge and left the courtyards full of long bars of shadow. Liang left the platform with legs that felt carved from damp wood. He turned toward the library, mind still murmuring the order of breath that Cai had drilled into them until it felt like a song without words. A voice snapped across the yard. Liang. He turned. Zhao Ren stood near the stone steps with two boys he recognized from the breathing ring. Both wore the alert smiles of those who have already chosen sides. Zhao's hands were empty but his stance was not casual. You think yourself special, Zhao said. Elder Mo's pity. Instructor Cai's nods. The gasps of outer boys who think a pulse in the belly makes a cultivator. You mistake luck for talent. Liang kept his posture even. His heart stumbled once at the heat under the words, then found the rhythm Cai had taught. I mistake nothing. I breathe as we were taught. Then breathe under pressure. Zhao took 2 steps and the circle formed of its own accord. Disciples drifted closer in ones and twos, then in clumps. Even those pretending not to watch arranged themselves where they could see between shoulders. A few whispered, a few smiled, more held still with the careful blankness of people who know that anything they show now might be read later by someone with longer sleeves. A duel. The word hung in the air without anyone needing to say it in full. Duels were not forbidden. They were story and warning and a way to let steam out of a sealed jar. They could teach. They could humiliate. Sometimes they maimed. Liang felt the spiral grow cool then warm beneath his robe. Threads laced in his vision, not with the violence of the valley but with the clarity of a pond that shows 3 pebbles under the surface and then shows that they are 3 doors. Refuse and wear the mask of caution and bear the weight of scorn. Accept and risk pain now to buy silence later. Try to bargain for tomorrow and let the whispers multiply before morning. He thought of instructor Cai's insistence that breath is a choice repeated until it shapes bone. He drew in air slowly. Very well. A hiss of sound moved through the circle. Zhao's mouth curled. Good. They walked to the middle of the stone yard where the dust had been tamped flat by countless feet. No weapons were drawn. Fists, breath, and the will to use both would decide how people talked at supper. Instructor Cai was elsewhere. Liang did not decide whether that mattered. He set his feet where the grooves of old patterns implied footing was best and lifted his hands. Zhao rolled his shoulders once and came on fast. The first exchanges were an argument of bone against bone. Zhao's fists spoke fluently. They cracked the air with the strength of long practice and landed through Liang's guard more than once. Bandages took the worst of the sting but not the heat. Liang's arms buzzed. His step bounced once when it should have sunk. Pain flared where his knuckles still had thin scabs from the post. Beneath the jolt the ember answered. Liang remembered Cai's voice telling them that breath makes a frame where there had been none. He drew air into the belly, not the chest. He let it settle where the warmth lived. He let that warmth run the length of his arms as if pouring oil where wood will bend rather than splinter. Zhao struck again. Liang felt the punch arrive a fraction earlier than his eyes showed it. He turned the forearm and let the blow slide from meat to air. It still hurt. It did not move him. A murmur ran around the circle. Not excitement. Adjustment. The watchers recalculated the shape of the story. Zhao pressed. Anger made his hands quick and sometimes it made them heavy. It did not make them clean. When frustration crept into a wrist, the path of a blow wobbled. Liang tried to meet force with stillness rather than with more force. He failed often. He succeeded enough. Each breath was a stake driven into ground. Each exhale was a small surrender of what did not matter so he could keep what did. Sweat made the stone smell like rain. Someone in the circle cursed under the breath when Zhao's hook grazed Liang's ear and made the world tilt. Liang bent his knees and the tilt became a bend rather than a fall. He blinked hard and the focus returned. Time stretched thin for a heartbeat. Zhao drew back for a finish. His shoulder rolled. His hip promised a wide swing, the kind that makes a crowd forget to breathe if it lands and makes a duelist forget himself if it misses. Liang stepped where the groove suggested weight belonged, not where panic told him to flee. He turned with the arm and let the swing pass, his body becoming for an instant the gap between a door and a frame. As Zhao's momentum carried him forward, Liang put his weight behind a short strike to the chest. It was not brilliant. It was exactly what the opening would hold. The ember warmed his forearm as if someone had pressed a cup of tea against the skin. The blow landed. Zhao Ren staggered 2 steps, eyes wide as if a stranger had called his name. The sound around them changed again. Gasps more than words. Surprise more than verdict. Zhao's face twisted. Fury came back into the eyes so quickly it looked like a muscle reflex. He lunged. Liang saw the teeth in the lunge. It was not about the strike now. It was about erasing the moment when the circle had said oh. He lifted his hands and dug for one more breath. A staff cracked against stone. The sound had the authority of the gong and the intimacy of a cane on a childhood floor. Enough. Instructor Cai stood at the edge of the circle, staff still vibrating in his palm. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. Silence emptied the yard so quickly the whisper of pines could be heard again at the far edge of the compound. You disgrace yourselves, Cai said, eyes moving from Zhao to Liang and back again. Qi is not for petty squabbles. It is a flame to be tended, not thrown on dry thatch to see how high it will leap. Do you wish to choke before you have taken your first step? Zhao dropped his gaze. He did it angrily, which is still dropping. His chest heaved. The boys behind him stared very hard at their own feet. Liang bowed his head until the pulse in his ear slowed. He let the breath out and did not try to keep the ember for himself. He imagined setting it gently back on the little stone shelf he had found for it in the exercises. Both of you, Cai said. Dawn drills doubled for a week. Perhaps sweat will wash arrogance from one and hesitation from the other. No one asked who was which. The circle loosened at the edges and dissolved. In that dissolving, Zhao found time to look up and send a final glance that was all promise and no words. He turned on his heel and left with his pair of reeds bending after him. Liang stood for a moment longer after the last watcher had drifted away. The stone under his feet felt warmer where the strike had landed. He flexed his fingers once, twice, and the ache announced itself in all the small joints. It felt honest. He rolled his shoulders, listened to the body complain, and accepted that it still worked. The library lamps were already lit by the time he crossed the threshold. The stooped keeper did not look up at first. When he did, his clouded eyes passed over Liang's bandaged hands and the dust at his knees. He said nothing about either. Jade token, he rasped, as if ritual is a thread you do not cut because you are winded. Liang presented it. The old man nodded once, then reached without hurry for a lower shelf and drew out a scroll bound in ash cloth. He pressed it into Liang's palms. On stabilizing the lower C. Move too quickly and you spill. Move too slowly and you sour. Read and close your mouth over your breath like a potter closing a jar. Liang retreated to a side alcove where a lamp burned with a steady flame. He unrolled the scroll and read the lines until they settled in the mind the way stones settle at the bottom of a water jar. The text spoke of simple figures but with a gravity that made them seem holy. Root the breath below the navel. Let the tongue rest like a bridge. Relax the throat so the wind may pass without catching. Keep the mind on the point where you feel the warmth and do not chase other lights. The body will argue. Let it. Do not argue back. He practiced the posture there in the dimness. Knees open. Spine long but not locked. He found the ember, touched it without grasping, and held a count in silence until the count itself fell away. He did not become a sage. He became calmer. He became aware that time was not a chain dragging him forward but a cloth he could fold once or twice before it creased. When he handed the scroll back the old man sniffed, which might have been annoyance or pleasure. The difference was not offered. Outside the sky had turned to indigo and the torches along the main path cast small worlds of light with long shadows between them. Disciples crossed the spaces quickly. Liang walked slower than he might have 3 days ago. The slower step hurt less. The slower step allowed more to be seen. A pair of juniors trading blows too fast for their own good. An older outer correcting a novice's wrist with a gentleness that spoke of a sibling somewhere far away. A steward counting crates by touch as much as by sight. The sect carried on with the intimacy of a village and the rigor of an army. In his quarters the air was cool. He sat on the bed and let his hands tremble without shame. The body knows to shake out what it does not wish to keep. The pain from the fight lodged in bright places at first and then drifted to dull banks where it would do less harm. His mind replayed the moment his own strike had landed. Not the sound, which had been small. Not the feel of flesh under knuckles, which he would not choose to dwell on. The thing that stayed was the feeling of the ember flowing into the limb, not as power in a story but as help given readily by something that had no voice. Real. The word sat like a stone. Not enough to win without thought. Not enough to escape pain. Enough to endure and to answer when called. The window latch clicked faintly. The sparrow was there again, perched like a piece of the night that had decided to grow eyes. Silver in the feathers, black in the gaze. It tilted its head as if there were writing on Liang's face and it meant to read it. Liang raised his eyes to meet the little stare. I do not know if I chose rightly, he said, voice low enough that the words seemed to land on the sill between them rather than in the room. I know only that I will not step back. The bird did not speak with the mind's voice this time. It did not need to. The spiral in Liang's chest pulsed once, then again, not painful, not even warm, only present. The pulse did not approve or condemn. It matched his breath exactly. He lay back and folded his hands over his belly the way the scroll described. The ember waited where breath could find it again at dawn. Outside, the courtyards quieted in layers, last footsteps, last laugh, last bucket set down. The mist returned to the pines and gathered itself, content for now to watch roofs and sleep slide over the compound. Liang listened until listening turned into rest. He let the last choices of the day settle without tearing them into smaller pieces. When sleep took him he did not fight, and the threads that sometimes hissed and tangled lay for once where they were placed.